Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Your Pelicans played the Boston Celtics back on Saturday and gave them a game.
Zion just picked
Show out, big boy, show out.
Pocket. And a right-hand throw down. Williamson back on the floor. Nance, McCollum, Daniels, as well as Zion says, give me the rock, let me do me, I'll lay it in with the left hand.
Treated Al Horford like old man River. Just went right around it.
First tie since 0-0. Herb is wide open in the right corner for three. And Herb says, somebody better guard me. Right corner, Herb for three from Z. Got another one, Herb. Tatum one-on-one with Z. Drives in. Zion stripped it. He took it away. Ball is out of bounds as Tatum tried to fight Zion
Jason
for
Tatum
it.
might have picked up a technical foul.
Yes, he did. Get it out long, Trey. Pop a three. Splash from the left wing.
Thank you, Chef Trey Murphy, for making that chicken salad.
As C.J. McCollum pops a left wing three, and McCollum has just passed the 14,000-point mark with that triple.
Congratulations, Mr. President Christian James McCollum.
That's what it sounded like on the New Orleans Pelicans radio network. Head coach Willie Green.
We just lost a little bit of our way. Like you said, second quarter, third quarter, only 11 points. I'll have to go back and watch before I make a true assessment of what kind of happened. But we definitely lost a little bit of our juice during that time, and that's the difference when you're playing against a top-tier team. You have to, on both ends of the floor, you have to execute and score for sure.
Zion Williamson finished with 25 points to lead the Pelicans, had his thoughts on what happened in the game.
These games are definitely playoff atmosphere like type games. Every game matters. I've said that in interviews where, how many games we got left? 10, 9. Each game matters, especially with how the standings are. So I don't know what's going on in the East too much, but every game matters for us, and I know every game probably matters for them. So the intensity is definitely gearing up towards playoffs. So I think that's why I definitely enjoy these games so much.
And now there's no rest for this team as they have 3 more games remaining in this homestand. The Phoenix Suns tonight, and then the Orlando Magic on Wednesday. Friday, the San Antonio Spurs, who are playing some really good basketball as well. Time to bring in Jim Eichenhofer, NewOrleansPelicans.com. Jim, we got a ton to kind of get into here as well. I just kind of want to start with a broader picture. We're halfway done the homestand. We knew it was going to be difficult. All these games mean something not only for the Pelicans, but the opponents that they're playing as well. So when you take a look at everything, what do you get out of the first 3?
Yeah, I mean, it's been some good and bad. I mean, I think the Bucks win was one of their best wins of the season and arguably their most important victory that they've gotten lately to be able to beat those guys. And then the Thunder game could have gone either way. That was a loss, obviously, and then you had this Boston loss as well. It seems like the last couple games has kind of reverted back to the basketball that we were familiar with from maybe 5 or 10 years ago, where it's been very low scoring. Points have been hard to come by. And one of the things that's interesting, even though they won the game against Milwaukee, the last 2 games the Pelicans have shot 39.6% from the field and 39.5% against Boston. You kind of expect, maybe not that low, but you expect to have some offensive struggles against Boston because they're very highly ranked defense, one of the best in the league. Maybe not so much against Milwaukee, but like I said, I mean, they were still able to get that win because the Pelicans defense I thought was really good. So interesting these last couple games. I'm not sure what we're going to see tonight against Phoenix, but the last 2 for them to shoot under 40% from the field is pretty unusual and just kind of a outlier. I mean, the game Saturday against Boston, and again, you have to factor in how good the opponent is. That was the lowest shooting game that the Pelicans have had since the February 23rd game against Miami when they shot 37.5% from the field, and a couple guys were shown the ejection gate in that game. So it's been kind of a mixed bag so far. I feel like, though, if they play the way that they did against Milwaukee over these last 3 games, they have a chance to, put together a couple more wins and hopefully have a winning homestand.
So I want to ask you, because I know Todd and JD bring it up a lot about the Pelicans shooting better on the road than at home. I've asked you about it. You told me it's like a 2% difference, right? 49, 47, something of that nature. How much is it, man, they just can't shoot at the blender, or it's the teams that they're playing? I mean, you just mentioned Boston being one of the better defender teams. Milwaukee's a tough team. OKC is one of the better defending teams here as well, because that's what I kind of take from these 3 games is, and there is a crowd, even though the numbers will show you that I think they're now, 13 and 11 against the top teams. But there's people that believe, hey, this team can't beat good teams. I'm like, okay, look, you face the first or second team in the West, the first team in the East, and the second team in the East. These are not bad basketball teams. These are teams that are built right now to build, to win championships. Now, OKC is not just yet. That's been a surprise this year, but they're really good. They have an MVP candidate. They're doing that. And I guess my big takeaway of this is, I actually think you could have won that OKC game.
Sure.
You didn't execute late. You should have. The Boston game, when you listen to Zion say they didn't match the energy and what Boston did in the third quarter, because they should have won the first half. The last 30 seconds of the second quarter,
the killer. That was
Zion
killer.
said it. He's like, we didn't understand that. Now again, that's a team that's been to the finals. That's a championship level team. You should have had a lead at halftime. You gave up a 3. In that last minute and on the last possession, you didn't attack it offensively like you should have. And that's understanding that every possession matters when you play those teams. And I think that's what Zion said on Saturday when he was asked, what do you learn by facing them? And that's literally what he said. As a matter of fact, I'll play it.
They upped their intensity and we didn't match it. And when we started to match it, the game was kind of out of hand at that point. But it just shows what type of team they are, a great team.
So, Jim, when you hear him say something like that, I'm okay if I'm a Pels fan. Look, I get nervous looking at what Dallas has done, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I can get a little nervous as to, hey, 3 games in this homestand, you've lost 2. I get that. But these are the top teams, and you're missing Brandon Ingram. Jose Alvarado is a key component to this team, to that bench. Having Trey Murphy being able to come off the bench and provide, that's a big component. So you're not at full strength. I understand you can say teams aren't. I get that. But that's my point, that I'm not freaking out, I guess, if that makes any sense, even though you've lost 2 of 3.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any reason to get crazy with the situation right now, that even though they have lost 2 out of their last 3 games. I mean, one of the things when I was talking about how poor the Pelicans have shot the ball in the last 2 games, I didn't even mention the part about they don't have Brandon Ingram and Jose Alvarado. Now, I think all season we've discussed how good this team is at being able to overcome having a couple guys out of the lineup. But I do think specifically when you're playing a team against Boston that is defensively so elite, it does kind of show up a little bit more that you don't have Ingram, who's second leading scorer on the team, one of the best playmakers, and then Jose Alvarado, who's really the closest thing to a true point guard that the Pelicans have. I mean, he is a true point guard. He's a guy that organizes you and gets you into your sets. So I think that is something that's very valid and something to factor in, that if they had everybody available, maybe they'd be 2-1 or 3-0 on the homestand so far.
All right, so look, there's nothing you can do about that, because you legitimately have to play what I think a lot of people consider. You and I talked about it going into the start of the homestand, the biggest game of the homestand, and I still think it is, in particular, because when you're looking at, playoff standings, implications in terms of tiebreaker and all of that, you're going to play the Phoenix Suns here twice in the next couple of games. You face them tonight, and then you're going to be playing them again here in 3 games. Yeah, yep. So it's right around the corner to do that. Give me a snapshot. What have the Suns looked like as of late?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've been playing pretty well lately. Their last game was a blowout loss against Oklahoma City, so that was definitely a setback. But I mean, they haven't played since Friday, so they've had a nice amount of time to get ready for this game tonight. And I think it is one of the most important games of the season. You know, I think sometimes the term must win is overused. I wouldn't call this a must win. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes biggest game of the season is a term that gets overused as well, including probably by me sometimes as well. But I don't think that it's an exaggeration to say that this game against Phoenix is the most important game that the Pelicans have played so far this season. And if you're looking at specifically the race for the top 6, it's definitely the most important game that they've played so far. And it might be the most important game over the last 2 weeks of the regular season. You think about it, there's such a huge swing between a win and a loss tonight. If you win, you're 3 games ahead of Phoenix in the standings, and you tied the season series at 1-1. If you lose, you're only 1 game ahead of them, and Phoenix would have clinched the tiebreaker by being ahead 2-0 in the season series. I mean, if the Suns win tonight, this is one way to look at this too. They control their destiny as far as the 6th seed. If they just win out, they don't even need help from anyone else because, obviously one of their other games is against the Pelicans. So, I mean, you're not even totally... I mean, the Pelicans would also control their destiny even if they lose tonight, but it's definitely one of those things where it's pretty incredible, the difference. To me, I think the easiest way that you could sum up the significance of Monday night's game is that if the Pelicans win, to me, they have a little bit of a cushion. It's not an extreme cushion. It's not where you can just kick your feet back and be like, yeah, we're good. Right. But I do think that, I mean, to some extent, you can, as a fan, not as a player or a coach, but as a fan or a media member, you can kind of take a sigh of relief and be like, all right, they're up 3 games on the Suns. I mean, they'd be also 2.5 ahead of Sacramento if they win tonight. And as we know, the Pelicans have the tiebreaker on them. So, I mean, if they win tonight, if the Pelicans win tonight, they basically have a 3-loss cushion on the Kings and the Suns when you factor in that Sacramento tiebreaker.
And why that's key is because the Kings are currently 7th and the Suns are currently 8th.
Right. And I mean, the thing is Sacramento and Phoenix have the exact same record, but Sacramento has the temporary tiebreaker lead on Phoenix I think it's based on division record because they're 2-2 in their season series with 1 more game left to play. So, I mean, one of the things that I wrote this morning is that even though Sacramento's ahead of Phoenix is really closer, quote in quotes, because of the fact that they still can win the tiebreaker. So, I mean, you either have a cushion or you're sweating. Right. And I think, and it's not just how it affects, tonight and tomorrow. You look at the standings. I think tonight could have a huge difference on what next week looks like as well, where you could be going into that 4-game road trip followed by the game 82 against the Lakers, either in a situation where you have a little bit of leeway to basically having no margin of error whatsoever.
It's crazy. If the season ended today, the Thunder are atop of the Western Conference. The Nuggets a half game back. T-Wolves in 3rd, 1 game back. So that's a race right there.
Yeah, very good.
The Clippers are 5 games back in 4th. Dallas, New Orleans, 2 games back of the Clippers now. Dallas being 5th and the Pelicans being 6th. You're going to talk more about Dallas here in a coming second. Then you got the Kings, Phoenix Suns, same record, 43-31, 9 games back. That's 2 games back of Dallas and New Orleans, to Jim's point. Then you have Labubu. The Lakers, your favorite team, 10.5 back. They're playing really well. Now, look, I know a lot of these games on the road. If you ask Graf, he says that road schedule's a joke. Everyone's making that the greatest victory of all time by LeBron. He had 9 threes against Brooklyn, the Nets, the Brooklyn Nets 2019 win. Anyway, and there's Golden State now has a 2-game lead on the Rockets, who have, I wouldn't say cooled off. They've won 9 of their last 10.
And 11 out of their last 12.
Exactly. So
they lost 1 game out of their last 12 after 11 game winning streak.
Interesting, though, through 11 teams, I could say there's 3 sections of competition going on. You have that section for the top seed, first 3 teams. And I still think you have a 4 or 5 team battle for 4 through 8. And then 10 and 11 and 9 are still kind of a battle with 8 games left. Again, if I'm the NBA, if I'm an NBA fan, every game matters because 11 teams we have yet to decide where we're going to be playing in the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's going down to the wire. I would think from a Pelicans perspective, what you hope is that for them, it doesn't come down to game 82 where there's massive stakes in that game against the Lakers. But it's going to be really interesting. I mean, also just the fact that some of these teams have so many games left against each other as well. So, I mean, for example, the Clippers play Sacramento on Tuesday, so that's a game to watch. The Pelicans play Sacramento on April 11th, and the day after that, Phoenix plays Sacramento. So, I mean, that could be that Phoenix versus Sacramento game could be the kind of thing where both teams are like, well, whoever loses this game is out of contention as far as getting into the top 6. I mean, who knows? Things could change a ton. But there are so many games between, and the Phoenix plays the Clippers twice next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. So, I mean, there's so many games that between this group of teams that, and not to mention the fact that the Pelicans have 2 games against the Suns as well. So Phoenix is definitely going to factor a ton into this whole conversation. Just if you look at their schedule, 2 games against the Pelicans, 2 games against the Clippers, 1 game against Sacramento, and they only have 8 left. So that's 5 of their 8 games right there.
Yeah, again, that breakdown was pretty substantial. I'm glad I'm can go back to the tape and listen to that again because it's true. but that's the point with 8 games left. And so let's do this. How should a Pelicans fan feel right now going to the game tonight?
I think you should feel optimistic and also a little bit pensive, just, pacing your house back and forth, just knowing the significance of this game. I mean, I feel like if the Pelicans win tonight, there's going to be a lot of smiles and a lot of happy people, and there's going to be some, when you check the standings, you're going to realize, like, wow, this is looking really good for top 6. But if they lose, you're going to, every single game, I think the rest of this week, the rest of the season is probably going to be, you're going to be, biting your fingernails and pacing and,
right.
and nervous. So I'd say optimistic, but I mean, for one thing too, the Pelicans have to play a ton better against Phoenix than they did the only other time that they played against the Suns this season, which was January 19th. Phoenix won 123-109, and there were a lot of things I think that the Pelicans didn't do well in that game that they're going to have to improve upon Monday.
I'm going to say his name. I'm going to say it. Devin Booker. Why is this guy just cook when he plays New Orleans? When I say cook, JD walked into the studio after Saturday night's game, and he goes, here comes Booker. I mean, Chef Booker, he called. I mean, why does he have such success against the Pelicans?
It's a really good question because it doesn't really make sense if you think about the defensive personnel that the Pelicans have. You would think of all the teams in the league that he would, have these monster games against. It wouldn't be New Orleans, considering they have Herb Jones and Dyson Daniels and Najee Marshall, and the list goes on. I mean, I know he has family in Mississippi that come to a lot of games in New Orleans. I don't know if that inspires him or whatever, but it is kind of unbelievable. Just the last maybe 2 or 3 seasons, I think he had a 59-point game in Phoenix a couple of years ago, and then he had 52 in the game in January. But I think that's near the top of my list tonight in terms of keys, things that the Pelicans have to do better. I mean, Phoenix's big 3 had 91 points combined between Booker, Beal, and Durant, and Beal only had 13 points in that game. They shot 35 for 61 as a group. So, I mean, well over 50% from the field with those 3. Another thing, too, that I had listed in the FanDuel keys to the game today, Phoenix is one of the worst teams in the league in turnovers. They're 6th worst in the league in terms of averaging 14.9 turnovers per game. I think a lot of that is because, they've said from the beginning we're fine not having a point guard, a true point guard. But if you watch them play, they have a lot of games where they're really mistake prone. The problem was on January 19th against the Pelicans, they only had 10 turnovers. And New Orleans is really good defensively at forcing turnovers. Okay. So that's something I think that another thing that the Pelicans just have to do a ton better tonight is get into the Suns defensively, do to them what the Celtics maybe did against the Pelicans on Saturday night. They just have to be much more of a presence and much more aggressive defensively. And, I mean, that's the only way that they're going to be able to get better results against Phoenix in their big 3.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, stand out to me. I mean, whether it's Booker, it's Durant, and all these guys. And look, I will say this. It was nice to see Dyson Daniels back. You saw some of the things on there. The guy hadn't played in a while. But he's one of those guys too with his size, right? And Herb, and I mean, you just got to throw some bodies at him. I know it's just, he gets his shot off so quick. Is kind of the thing I look at it. But normally when you play a player like that, I say let him go get 60. It's other people you kind of have to keep in check. Does that make sense? To use the famous phrase, Pelicans killer. Okay, other than Booker and Durant, is there any other matchup worries, or can those two guys alone get the win? How's Beal playing?
Yeah, I mean, Beal, of course, by his standards, he's been pretty quiet, but I mean, that's to be expected if you think that he's the third option after he's been the number one option his entire career in Washington. Grayson Allen is leading the NBA in three-point percentage among guys with a high volume of attempts, shooting 47% from three-point range. So he's definitely dangerous. He was 3 for 6 in the game here in January. And Yusuf Nurkic, the center, only had 5 points in that game, but he had 15 rebounds and 9 assists. So he was definitely a focal point of how good the Suns were in that game. So, yeah, I mean, those are some of the guys. I mean, I pretty much listed the whole starting lineup for Phoenix that you have to be concerned about.
Right.
Another area, too, that I think is worth focusing on tonight is the benches. The Suns have had a lot of trouble with depth this year because they signed a bunch of minimum contract guys in the offseason because they simply didn't have much cap room. And, I mean, for the most part, I think other than Eric Gordon, maybe another guy or two here or there, most of those guys have not panned out. So can the Pelicans kind of take advantage of the depth advantage that they have over Phoenix? Obviously, it would be a greater edge if the Pelicans were healthy, but now you don't have Ingram, so you've moved Murphy from the second unit to the starting lineup, and you don't have Jose Alvarado, so he's not available either. So I think it would be more of a differential on paper if it wasn't for those two recent injuries. But like you said, you have Dyson Daniels coming back. Maybe Jordan Hawkins can have a breakout game tonight. But I do think that that's an area that the Pelicans are going to have to try to capitalize on, just the fact that Phoenix's depth has been something of a question mark, I think, throughout their season.
All right, Jim, as always, we will see what takes place on the court. Now we turn our attention to, of course, Monday's special.
Yes, I didn't do a player of the week poll this week because the Pelicans only won one game. Let's bring that back next week, hopefully after a successful span of these 4 games.
We're placing a pause on it.
They're playing. I mean, there's been a player of the week almost every week for a long stretch. It'll take a little break this week, but hopefully after this week of Phoenix, Orlando, San Antonio, and Phoenix again, we'll be able to bring that back on Monday. But there is a player to watch every week. And this week I went with C.J. McCollum for a few reasons. One, I mean, he's the most experienced player on the Pelicans roster. He's played in 63 playoff games, including 53 starts. He's been to the playoffs 9 times out of his 10 years, with last year being the only exception. So he's trying to make it double figures in terms of making it to the playoffs. So I feel like a guy like him at this point in the season is so crucial. And then you factor in that Brandon Ingram obviously isn't available, so the scoring load on him is even greater. The need for him to have big games and efficient nights is really pivotal for New Orleans at this stretch. So I'm looking to see if he can have a huge week in some of these games, in the just huge moments and huge matchups that they have this season. And also another thing I was going to throw in about CJ, with the Pelicans at 45 wins, they're not going to be able to get to 50 wins this week because they just have the 4 games. But CJ is also seeking the 50th win season of his career. So I think, and I've written about this a little bit and tweeted about this, I still think that if the Pelicans can get to 50 wins, and we can talk about all these different scenarios, but I think to make it less complicated and more simply put, if the Pelicans go 5-3 in their last 8 games, that they get to 50, I think there's such a good chance that they'll be a top 6 team. Regardless of how they get there, I think if that happens and CJ, like I said, gets his 4th season of his career,
5 in the next 8,
50 wins, then I think we'll be looking at a few days off and the Pelicans having a week to prepare for the playoffs.
But I'm with you. I mean, if you win 5 of the next 8, because that's what you'd have to do. Yeah, 45 wins right now, you could definitely get there. Look, tonight's, they're all key. I mean, they're all big. Look, Orlando's playing really well. We just saw what they did. Obviously, in Orlando, they're a game out of 4th right now, a game and a half ahead of the pace. No, all of it. And then, what did Wemby have? 40-20?
40-20 on Friday, and then I think he had 32 last night. They lost, but they were on a 3-game winning streak going into that game against Golden State.
Let me tell you something. I don't know about you, but when I look at those highlights, right? I mean, San Antonio's packed. I mean, everyone's there to watch. I mean,
that is impressive.
You would not think that team
is a million games under 500.
Dead last in the Western Conference.
Right.
But what does that tell you about not only that culture there, what Popovich is trying to do? Because, again, Jim, they are dead last. They have 18 wins. And you would never know if I just turned the game on, watch the effort. They got, I always mispronounce his name, Sohan. He's launching threes, and he's celebrating like it's the NBA Finals. The crowd's standing up on. I'm like, they're nowhere near the playoffs.
Right.
I mean, they're 34 games back, but that just goes to show you that's Friday's game here.
I think it's because of the Wemby draw, honestly. I think what would be an interesting science experiment would be to have them play a game. You know, they played last night at home with Wemby playing. If their next home game, he's out, you know, he takes the game off to see what kind of crowd. If the fans there know way in advance that he's not going to play, because he's such a draw that I feel like even if you're rooting for that team and you're a Spurs fan, it's not irrelevant what their record is, but it's like it's so much fun to watch him play and see, like, go to the arena and say, what is this guy going to do tonight that we haven't seen before? So I think that's the biggest reason. You could talk about, you know, the Spurs culture and their tradition of winning and stuff like that. But I do think that if it seems to me, and I don't have the scientific data to prove this or back this up, it seems to me like their attendance has actually gotten higher lately, even though they're further out of the race compared to earlier in the season. And I think a lot of that is just that their fans grasping the idea of how special that guy is and how much fun it is to watch him play, because you just don't know what's going to happen. But I feel like when the Pelicans played there in February, maybe I'm misremembering this, but it didn't seem like it was that kind of atmosphere. I just think it's building. People are just understanding, like, this guy is unbelievable, and it's so much fun. And even if you're 40 games under 500 and you're going into a lot of these games not expecting to win, it's still worth the price of admission to see him play, which I'm sure a lot of fans here are going to say the same thing about Friday's game in the Smoothie King Center.
We got a lot to focus on. We got a lot to get to this year. So I'm not saying let's look next year. But it is interesting. I just did that, and I looked at the standings, and I'm like, we always talk about the Western Conference being ridiculous. So Houston's trying to get in right now in the play-in, right? We don't know what's going to happen with Golden State moving forward and all that, but Houston's a good team, and they're only going to improve next year under a second year of Ime Udoka. Utah, they give the Pels fits. So regardless, at some point they're going to be competitive, probably pushing for a playoff spot. Memphis
especially before they shut everyone down for the season, which they've done 2 years in a row.
Memphis is where they are because Ja Morant's not playing. We saw firsthand, the time he did get back this year, they beat us twice.
Right.
I mean, so Memphis it has Ja Morant.
You should be able to put them. You should be able to put them right back into the mix next year.
They're top 16 with Ja Morant. Period. End of story.
Yep.
So they're going to be competitive. I like Portland's young players. It's going to be real interesting to see what they do moving forward. And then, as I just said, San Antonio. Look, in the offseason, when you see a player like that, whether it's the free agency, the draft, pop, some draws, in the NBA, you only need another piece, to kind of help that. And all of a sudden, the Spurs could be competing for a play-in spot. So I'm just saying, next year, I mean, the Western Conference is something else when you kind of look at it right now.
Yeah, I think there's only maybe 2 or 3 teams that are going to go into next season saying it's not highly imperative that we are immediately as competitive as we possibly can be. So you're talking maybe the 12 or so other teams in the West are all. I've heard a lot of people say this lately, that there's 12 teams in the West that are going to go into next season saying we're a top 6 team. So the math doesn't really work on that there's 12 teams that think they're going to be in the top 6. So that it's going to be even more, I think, competitive next year as far as, and we've seen it like last year, the fact that a team with Luka and Kyrie didn't even make the top 10.
Right.
Didn't even make the play-in.
Right.
And then, this year it's been kind of strange because of Memphis getting kicked out of that top 10. If they were in it, we would have had a second consecutive season where maybe Golden State didn't make the play-in this year with with Steph Curry. So, I mean, it just goes to show you how difficult it is that you can't even say. I mean, it's difficult to even finish 500, even if you have one of the greatest players in the history of the game on your roster in the West.
Again, you're thinking of LeBron and Steph and all those guys. They're in the play-in. I mean, but again,
bottom of the play-in right now.
They're in the play-in for a reason because other teams have won more games.
Sure.
And I mean, so that's the point. It's pretty incredible when you look at it. Well, tonight's the night, game 4 of the 6-game homestand Pelicans and Suns. Jim, you and I will be back on Wednesday to preview the Magic game and see how this one went. Should be fun. Let's see what takes place.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I know I've detailed this pretty in depth, but I mean, I think the mood is definitely going to be contingent quite a bit on what happens tonight against the Suns.
All right, thank you, Jim Eichenhofer for NewOrleansPelicans.com. As always, we appreciate you for tuning us in. We'll see you on Wednesday on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.